Hi there, and welcome to the Skylight Books Author Reading Series. You can find out about this and all of our author events at www.skylightbooks.com. At our website, you can also browse our inventory as well as order books online. And don't be afraid to follow us on Twitter or even be our friend at facebook.com. If you'd like to talk to a real person, we can be reached at 323-660-1175. Thanks for listening and enjoy.
I would call like a Zen approach to this topic, and the emphasis is on narrative, obviously, because I come from a screenwriting background. I made some short films, and I worked as a producer on some TV series, so I kind of had a really great, I think, little education of pretty much a wide array of aspects of filmmaking and also about television. And so bear that in mind if you're thinking about any questions to ask. The basic idea of what I want to talk about is something that Richard Walter, who's the chair of the screenwriting department at UCLA, says when he begins each class. And that is three words that really stuck with me. And he says them kind of like this, because this is his voice. Don't be boring. That the biggest sin you could possibly make as a screenwriter is to be boring. And I always remember that because I think that the biggest curse for a screenwriter nowadays, because audiences have become much more sophisticated and there's a zillion movies coming out every year, and it's really hard to be original, to find fresh ideas, to find fresh approaches to your ideas, to explore themes with a fresh point of view, to find characters we haven't seen a million times, to avoid cliches in dialogue, and to be the main sin for a screenwriter is to be predictable, and when I think about the movies that I've really appreciated over this past year, for me, Hurt Locker was right up there at the top, and the reason for that, for me, was that it was suspenseful from the very first frame of the movie. And 500 Days of Summer was another one that really struck me, and it was because it told a story in a really unconventional, interesting way that I hadn't seen before. And actually, a woman who worked as the script supervisor on the film is sitting here. And if you think about doing continuity on a movie, think about 500 Days of Summer, and she really deserves the gold medal for that. So under the heading of Don't Be Boring, I wanted to talk about sort of three main aspects of how to approach writing a screenplay. Three elements that kind of are what I would call the antidote to the predictability and lack of originality. One is to start off with, and by the way, I realize I can say these things and they're easy to say and hard to do, but this would be the ideal. One would be starting off with an iconic character. And if you think about an iconic character, I'm sure a lot of them come to mind, both protagonists and antagonists. I mean, all the way back to, Scarlett O'Hara and Hannibal Lecter on the other end of the extreme. And the idea being that an iconic character is a character that contains a real core contradiction to who he or she is. There's a paradox about the character and a lot of mystery about what's making the character tick. And iconic characters are those characters, if you really think about classic films, you might not even remember much of the plot, but you really remember the character. And when you think about Up in the Air, most recently, or Hurt Locker, in Up in the Air, you have a character whose whole career has been based upon not making personal connections with people. He's only in airports. He's only having superficial conversations with people on an airplane. It's all very much, he's in a hotel room, he's at a company, he's firing somebody, and then he's parting. And it's all about creating distance and parting and having very superficial relationships. And the inciting incident of Up in the Air occurs when, they're changing company policy and they don't want him to travel. They want to start doing it, more from remote. And he fights it because it's his safety net and it's the thing that helps him. It's his basic modus operandi. And then, of course, he meets a woman who seems like the female equivalent of him, a businesswoman, and there's I don't want to give it away, but there's a twist in terms of how he puts himself out there. So he starts out very armored. He starts out, like most iconic characters, wearing a metaphorical mask. There's something about who we think he is when we first meet him and who he really is. Who we think he really is someone who's very slick and together. He's George Clooney, you know, I mean, it's the George Clooney archetype, and it all goes very smoothly for him. But on the inside, under the mask, he's terrified. He's terrified of making a connection. He's terrified of abandonment. He's afraid of being hurt. He's afraid of love. He's afraid to have an intimate, serious, long-term, committed relationship. And in the case of that character, Ryan Bingham, played by George Clooney, because that's his big fear and because that's the thing he's hiding underneath all of this armor, the movie is about the collision of the safety net that he's lived with for most of his life and the net being removed. So the whole point of the movie is to strip him away and make him completely vulnerable. So first, his job is taken away in terms of the safety of how it's been working for him, and his frequent flyer mileage is at stake. But what's really at stake is his heart and his ability to stay on the surface and to continue to be superficial. And if you think about all iconic characters, it's a process of starting off armored, starting off feeling a sense of security in the fact that they're in control, and then the process of the whole movie is pushing them to the point where they're more and more out of control, pushing them to the edge, and the real goal is for them to have to face their fears. What we learn about movies, hi Paul, what we learn from movies is that vulnerability is actually a great strength, and vulnerability is what makes people who are living their lives with this baggage of their fears that they're sort of hanging on to and that they're armored up and that they're protecting, and it's served them very well up until this certain point. The whole reason there is a movie and that we're focusing on this character at this particular time in the movie is that that's all going to be stripped away, and they're going to be forced to become completely vulnerable, which they resist. I mean, who wants to be vulnerable? Being vulnerable is really scary. But that ultimately becomes their strength. And catharsis, which goes back a very, very, very long time to Aristotle, literally means the purging of pity and fear. So when you think about a movie that's really satisfying, like, in my opinion, Up in the Air, or The Hurt Locker, or Precious, or 500 Days of Summer, they're satisfying films for me as an audience member because I undergo catharsis during the movie. For an audience member to undergo catharsis, it basically just means that you're having an emotional release. So you're either laughing, crying, you're afraid, you're hiding your eyes from the screen. You're having a visceral emotional reaction to what's up on the screen. That's the goal for screenwriters, to transport an audience to a place where they're going to undergo catharsis. From the point of view of manufacturing the screenplay, it's impossible for the audience to undergo catharsis unless a character on screen is undergoing catharsis. So what that means is you need to push your characters to the edge. And pushing your characters to the edge will occur at the climax of the film. And in the book, one of the lessons is the climax is the truth. And what that really means is that it's the moment of truth for the character. It's where the character is facing his or her deepest fear. It's where they're really on the edge. They're completely vulnerable. And it's the place where the true self can really emerge. Unless it's a tragedy, which I'll talk about in a minute. But in a typical, most Hollywood films have more or less a happy ending, hopefully an unpredictable approach to a happy ending, but I'll get to that in a minute as well. But the climax equals the truth basically means the true self is emerging, and for that to be true, which I think it is, that means that for most of the movie up until that point, there is a false self. And the false self in the setup of the movie, particularly the first 10, 20 pages of Act 1, the character we're meeting isn't really being his or her authentic self. They are wearing the mask. And there's a great scene in American Beauty when, you know, the scene when Annette Bening does she's doing the real estate showing and she says, "I will sell this house today." And then she doesn't sell the house. And the people leave and she draws the blinds and she yells at herself and she says, "You're bad, I hate you, I hate you." And she starts to cry. And then she composes herself, and if you watch that scene, she literally composes herself, and she goes like this before she very calmly walks out of the room in the house that's for sale. And if you look at it, it's literally like she's putting her mask back on. And if you look at if you look at the beginnings of films, the first 10 pages, one question I would ask yourself is, in what way is my character representing him or herself to the world? And is that real and authentic? And if it is, you probably have a structural problem, because if they're real and full and true and authentic, then you don't have any place to take them. For me, the best place to start off a movie is with a character who is already in a little bit of trouble. I always tell my students, start a character who's desperate on page 1. You know, don't spend 10 pages of exposition that's just flat, where you're introducing us to the world and we're waiting for the good stuff to come. Start with them already in trouble. Start with them already having a problem. Start with them, because one of the goals for a screenwriter, and I always write this the first day of class, where is the heat? Where is the heat? That's the question. That means that you want to build and build and build and keep turning up the heat to the point where the climax of the movie is a boiling point, right? It's like a volcano erupting. If your goal is to generate heat, that means in scenes you're writing into the conflict, you're milking the conflict, you're pumping the conflict up. You're always trying to raise the stakes. And stakes are the fuel that's going to make the fire and the heat intensify. What stakes basically means is your characters need to have really strong external and internal goals, something they're trying to gain, something to win. Stakes mean while they're trying to achieve something and gain something, they have something to lose. If your character only is seeking something to gain, you have pretty much a half-baked character. Character development is always, a note that you get very often as a screenwriter, which is always frustrating, but a great gift, because in my experience, it's 100% accurate whenever I get the note, and the note is, dig deeper. Dig deeper. The difference between a first draft and a 20th draft, and I find that probably every project I work on goes through about 20 drafts, is it's a process of excavation. So I've kind of worked out the basic structure, I've worked out the plot and the physical external things. I've introduced some characters. Hopefully they have distinctive voices, and hopefully they're iconic and flawed and multidimensional. But the process of digging deeper is finding out what makes them really tick on deeper emotional, psychological, spiritual levels. And that's about stripping away all of their defenses and trying to really understand. In order to really dig to the core of a character, you absolutely have to know what your characters are afraid of. If you don't know what they fear, you're writing away from the drama. You're writing to respect their comfort zones, and writers respect their characters' comfort zones because they don't want to risk on the page. Probably the most successful things that I've written and been involved with, I felt I was taking personal risk on the page. It made me uncomfortable. And I remember a play that I wrote, I had a scene that afterward, a friend of mine was giving me notes, because it was a development of the play, and she said that scene when the stepfather's yelling and just goes ballistic, and he's yelling at the family, she said, did you see everybody in the room? Everybody was so uncomfortable. And I said, I know, I'm going to rewrite it, I'm going to fix it. And she's like, no, that's good. That's good, that's what you want. You want them to be uncomfortable. Think about that great scene, well, two come to mind, those in comedies too. Look at Swingers. That great scene when Jon Favreau's character, he meets the girl at the party and he calls and she's not home and he keeps leaving the message and then he keeps wanting to change it and revise it, and every single time he calls back you're like, no, don't call back, please. You're like, it's like somebody's killing you and stabbing you. It's so uncomfortable. Or in The Graduate, when Benjamin Braddock is seduced by Mrs. Robinson and he runs out of the room, then, well, what happens? Mr. Robinson comes home and he has to sit down and talk to him like nothing ever happened. It's excruciating to watch. Those are the scenes that we remember, right? So in order to make characters really uncomfortable, you're making them more and more and more vulnerable. And I think, reality television, it's really no surprise why reality television is so popular. It's because we watch people who have an incredible amount to gain if they win, but they can also fail spectacularly and feel total humiliation. And, there's that side of us that wants to see people at their most vulnerable. You sit in a movie theater, it's extremely passive, you're completely safe, you're sitting in a comfortable chair, you have your snacks, and you watch people take huge risks and go through huge emotional turmoil and face their fears. And then most of us go home to our lives and don't really change anything in our lives. And I think the need for movies is to watch people go through those enormous changes and have epiphanies, so that I think we probably say, one day I'll take that big risk, but not today. But probably a lot of large changes that we made in our lives might have been inspired and motivated by a movie that you saw, if you think about it. So iconic characters contain a paradox, strong internal conflict. So, and the very weakness and the very thing that they're trying to hide and protect is what will be in question, and what they're going to have to, it'll be the main challenge for the character, whatever their main weakness is. The other is starting off with a premise that contains a very strong central conflict. This is what I call the hook, or you can call it the catch. Like, what's the catch? If I said to you, if everybody comes here and buys a book, I'm going to give you each $10,000 cash, everybody would say, what's the catch? The way that usually presents, and by the way, I'm not offering that. The way that the catch or the hook or the central conflict of a film will present itself is with the word but. But is your great friend when you're creating a film. If you think of great movies, when you think about how to encapsulate them into a one-sentence logline, it's always going to have a but in the middle. If you look at a film like one of my favorite comedies of all time, Tootsie, an out-of-work actor who lives for acting can't get a job as an actor, so he puts on a dress, becomes an actress, but falls in love with his co-star on the TV show, and he can't have her. And it creates, the but of your idea will create the whole second act. It creates the whole center of your movie. And one of the things that I talk about in the book is how Act 2 is where a poorly structured screenplay goes to die. Usually the second act is so difficult to, it's hard to keep it buoyant and hot, back to the question of, where is the heat? And the reason is usually because you're starting off with an idea that's conceptually flawed. It doesn't have a strong enough central conflict to begin with. So if you're going to dig into what the conflict is, the whole second act is really going to explore that main central conflict. It needs to be a huge conflict. If it's something that's easily solved, then you don't have a middle. You have like a really great first act, and you don't have any place to go. So a lot of times at UCLA, because the classes are 10 weeks, we have on the quarter system, a lot of people are forced to start writing really quickly before they've really worked out a strong idea with a strong central conflict. And since every scene in a movie has to contain a conflict, the scene is just a micro of the macro, and that means the premise itself needs to contain a strong central conflict. It needs to contain a contradiction, just the idea itself. The other thing that I think really strong, classic, successful movies contain is a strong central mystery. If you look at your premise and it doesn't contain a central mystery, I think it's also missing a really key ingredient. It'd be like missing, the sugar in a cake or something. It's that integral and essential. A central mystery is going to be it's the ingredient that you need to generate suspense, because suspense comes from anticipation of what's going to happen next. Mystery means something's obscured, something's hidden, something is, there's something that we need to figure out along the way. And a central mystery could, in some films, like a romantic comedy, could just be as simple as, is he going to be able to move past his fear of intimacy and let her know that he really loves her before it's too late, which would be like the central mystery of When Harry Met Sally, along with the central question of When Harry Met Sally, can heterosexual men and women actually be friends without the sexual component? And the whole movie basically explores that. Once the central mystery is resolved and you've exposed all of the truths, the movie's over. That's why the climax is the truth. So one of the things I like to think about is if you had playing cards in your hand, like you were playing poker, as the movie progresses, in Act 1 you're going to show some of the cards, because hopefully audiences are have natural human curiosity. So you're going to show some cards of who this character is and what makes the character tick. You're going to give maybe a glimpse of what's behind the mask. You're going to play more cards in Act 2. You want to decide, what's the card I'm holding on to? What's my trump card? You know, what's the one card which is also very much connected to the core. My telepathy is working. The core fear of the character, the thing that the character is most protecting, would be that final card. That's the card everybody's waiting to see. In The Hurt Locker, you're kind of, that card you don't find out until very close to the climax of the movie, which is, why is this guy such an adrenaline junkie? Why is this guy the one who's willing, he's not afraid to put on a 100-pound armor, suit of armor and walk up to bombs that could explode in his face at any moment. He's not afraid of that, so you're thinking, if he's not afraid of that, he has to be afraid of something, because everybody's afraid of something. There's a mystery about how do we unlock this guy. He's fascinating, and you find out when he goes home. Have people seen The Hurt Locker? You find out when he goes to the supermarket, he can't exist in regular, mundane reality. You find out when he's with his baby, and such a great scene in the nursery with the baby when he's playing with him. You know what the toy is that he's playing with? It's a jack-in-the-box that can pop up at any time like a improvised explosive device. You find out that, and what does he do? The whole movie is the countdown to how long his tour is of dismantling bombs. He goes home to his beautiful wife and his child, and something that anybody else, and in fact his comrade, just wants to have a family and a child. So he gets to go home to all of that. But he can't survive that way. That to him is like soul death. So the end of the movie, which I think is so brilliant, is he goes back. It's the only place he really feels alive is when he's this close to death, and that adrenaline is his lifeblood. So the central mystery is explained, and the movie's over for me in a very satisfying way. Suspense is not generated by scary lighting and music and things popping out of the dark. Suspense is generated in any genre by our emotional investment in the characters. And one of the lessons in the book is every movie is a suspense movie, because if you're writing the script, you want it to be a page turner, and if it's a movie, you want people to be riveted. You don't want people to. If I check the time or think now's a good time to go to the bathroom or get a drink, they've lost me. And it's interesting as filmmakers to note when that moment comes, because that means the plot has gone slack. If the plot is a line, it has to stay taut, and when it sags, right, it goes slack, it's because it's cooling down, it's not heating up. And Dorothy Allison, who wrote Bastard Out of Carolina, I was at a writing conference and she said something that really stuck with me, and these are the last 2 points I'll make, and then if you have any questions. She said, you have to make me worried. I have to be very worried. And if you look at Bastard Out of Carolina, you're extremely tense and worried the entire experience. And in a comedy, you can be just as worried as in The Hurt Locker that a bomb's going to explode. When we're not worried about what's going to happen to the characters, the suspense drops out, because we're not even, and you can't feel suspense and worry unless you really care about the characters. And the only way we care about characters is when they're vulnerable. The last couple of things to say. One is a quote from Walter Mosley, and it's a great quote that has really helped me with plotting. And he said, plot is revelation. And the idea is that a movie is an external series of events that's actually an internal journey. So as the plot progresses, we're going into deeper and deeper levels and getting inside who the characters are. And last couple of things. Let's see, I just want to see if I covered all of my... So the difference between plot and story, which is also in the book, is like, plot is this shirt, story is how I feel about this shirt. And I've traveled a lot. I was consulting in Russia, in Moscow, and they're extremely well educated, and they know history and humanities and art and music and theater. But the one thing but they're intellectual, and they always approach things from an intellectual point of view. And my job was basically to say, but how do they feel? How do they feel about that? How do they feel about that? And without knowing how characters are feeling, we're not going to understand how they're vulnerable, and without vulnerability, we're not going to have emotional investment, and then you just have people moving through time and space, and instead of a visceral, cathartic reaction. And so if the great demon of a screenwriter is predictability, the thing that we want to achieve is inevitability. You want it to feel at the end of the film that, oh, I didn't see that coming, but oh, I should have. And it's building to that, what I would call the aha moment. The aha moment is, you know, of course, I didn't see it, and now I see it. I love a great aha moment at the end, something that when you do reveal that final card, it's like just as it's being played, it's that intersection of recognition, revelation, and you can't trump the truth, so that trump card that's your key, I think, to great success at the end of the film. Anybody have any questions? And yes?
Since you're talking about iconic characters, I'm interested in what you think about audiences this last weekend defying the critics and going to see Sex and the City 2 and open at #1 at 70 million.
I think it's the hair and clothes. Well, you know, I mean, major studios now, I mean, it's kind of, we're at a really difficult time, and yet also a very exciting time in the film business, and it's because the studios need to put out big tentpole movies that are based on books, TV series, comic books, or are sequels. You know, they're trying to generate franchises. So I just think, you know, and they do that for marketing, you know, obviously. So I think Sex and the City was escapist. It was familiar, and you know, it was like, oh, I get it. I know what it is. I didn't see the second one yet. But I enjoyed the first one. I mean, I thought, you know, Michael Patrick King is extremely talented, and he wrote and directed the first one and the second one. And I think we really we like Carrie. We like Carrie Bradshaw. She's flawed. She's vulnerable, and you know, she's always been kind of an underdog. You know, casting is so important. I think Sarah Jessica Parker just. You know, she's one of those actresses who can be both beautiful and neurotic and insecure at the same time. And I think, you know, she's the magnet. I mean, I think she is an iconic character, actually, don't you? Yeah. Okay. So we're in agreement. Yeah, I think she definitely is an iconic character. I think you could pretty much put her in any scenario, and we'll probably be interested in her. So, yeah. Yes.
In stage plays, playwrights often use monologues to be the instruments through which characters are revealed and show vulnerability and things like that. Do monologues ever translate to screenplays, or is there a better device that can be used for screenplays?
That's a great question. Well, one thing, you know, when I do teach the MFA classes at UCLA, I always have them write monologues. I have them write a protagonist monologue, and the subject is, how are you desperate in your ordinary world, meaning at the beginning of the movie. Because I really strongly recommend start with desperation. Because also people always shy away from conflict, and I always say, make it as bold as you possibly can. Just push it so far that you're just thinking, this is ridiculous, and it won't be bold enough, and it won't be ridiculous. It's weird how people shy away from that. So a monologue, just as a tool, really helps the screenwriter dig into the characters and excavate. You know, now more and more you don't see monologues so much in films because people have short attention spans, and film is a visual medium, and we want to keep it moving and have action and keep it dynamic. So, you know, if you look, you know, one of my favorite movies of all time is Network. You know, Paddy Chayefsky's great screenplay, and look at that great monologue. You know, that crescendos with "I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore." So I think if you can really place it if it's really earned and that character has reached a place where they need to be heard, you know, damn it, no matter what, and you can write like Paddy Chayefsky, I think you can earn a monologue, and Otherwise, I would keep it moving. And what Hal Ackerman, who's the co-chair of the screenwriting department at UCLA, he talks about what he calls the objective correlative, which is, I don't have a pen, but we're here. If my father died when I was 6 years old, and if he gave me this pen now stands for my father. That's the objective correlative. So anytime I look at this pen, I'm thinking about my father. And that can speak volumes when you can create external relationships and actions and, keepsakes and things that have great significance without a lot of words. But I would write the monologue and then just keep stripping it down and stripping it down and stripping it down until this is really all you need. Which was really that was the process of writing this book. I mean, I said at the launch party that I was the kind of student where if I didn't know the answer to the essay question, I just kept writing and hoped it was in there somewhere. And that's what this book was a lot. I just wrote and wrote and wrote a lot of stuff, and then the editor was like, but what's the lesson? What's it really about? How do you distill it? So I would write the monologue and go, what's the core of it? And probably not have a lot of monologues in a screenplay. I don't know if that answers your question. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm very interested in writing music scores. I got 3 friends of mine going to start working on a film, writing a screenplay, and the name of the screenplay is going to be meeting a late afternoon, meeting a French woman on a Paris subway. It takes place in France, and I got 4 characters, but I just wrote the music score for it, and it's a jazz rhapsody. And it took me 9 months to write the piano part. So eventually, I got the music already edited, recorded. I'm going to work on the orchestration part. So we're going to write the screenplay, and the same thing with the film is going to be that type. It's a Ronnie's tragic love story, and it's going to be I want to make it's going to be a feature film. But I write music. I like very interested in music scores, film music.
Do you need to find somebody to write the book, or you're going to write the book? Or the screenplay?
I got 3 friends who are going to write the screenplay. I write the music. I'm very interested in music, so I'm more into that.
Okay. I'm getting the signal. We only have a couple of minutes, but yeah, you and then you and yeah. Yes, please.
So you mentioned the drafting process.
Yes.
I'm a big fan of that. One thing that happens in the drafting process, which I assume you do, is you get input from other people. And I'm in a writers group, and
that's great.
People individually, but the problem with a lot of writers groups is that you get this zone of weirdness where you get a lot of this is a great script. Here's how I would write it, and you get that sort of thin, hazy line between constructive criticism and fuck you. Go
right, and destructive criticism. Right.
So how do you, as someone who's done as much as you have, how do you pick and choose what is good constructive criticism from what is?
Yeah, that's a good question. Finding a consensus is obviously really helpful. So I would get a second opinion. What I try to do, I was talking about this in the class the other day because people are handing in their drafts and talking about the rewrite process. And I think that it's hard to filter it, you get so much, sometimes you get a lot of different points of view, and then part of the job of being the screenwriter is being able to take notes and disseminate all of that information and decide what, to separate what's not valuable from what is, or sometimes it's a good note, but that's just not the movie you're writing, But if I get a consensus, so one of the things I was saying is stagger your reads. I try not to give, several people the same draft at the same time. I usually give the most nurturing, kind person who I feel safest with the first rough draft, because I know they're not going to just demoralize me. You want to feel, when you get notes, you should feel inspired to go back to it, and if the notes are too harsh and blunt, sometimes you just want to go crawl into a hole and die and put the script away, and then, that's not constructive. So if I get that, let's say I get that note and I'm not sure about it, it resonates. I usually find there's truth to every note. There's the note under the note a lot of times where you think, I don't agree with that, but like something was bothering them. What's really under that? There's usually something under it. Then you may address some of the other notes that you did agree with, and then I would give, maybe you don't change that yet, then give it to the next person or the next couple of people. If you get the same no, well then you're getting a consensus. Then you probably want to look at it. I just wrote a pilot, and there was something that was really, there's a central mystery in the pilot that's really important to me, and my producer just kept saying, I don't get it. And I just felt so strongly about it, so I kept holding on to it, and I think now that it's, moving forward, everybody really likes that surprise, but I think it was about how it was executed. I had the twist I think the twist is good at the end, it's just how I got to it that wasn't working. So it's good to, you need to know what kind of questions to ask. Where did I lose you? Why did that bother you? As opposed to just, if somebody says, I don't know, I just didn't like it, it's not helpful. So you have to be able to be a good detective and try to really question them, and try to find out what's under it, because it may not be the thing they're saying. There's, great dialogue has lots of subtext. A lot of notes, there's the subtext. So I don't know if that helps, but do you have a question? Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering, when you were talking about the first 10 pages,
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say, you used a lot of comedy examples, but you did make the remark that tragedy is different.
Yeah. Sorry, I forgot to go back to that.
Both in reference to, the first 10 pages and the masks, characters,
Yeah.
who were going to have to be removed, and the tragedy, and just any remarks on tragedy and tragic endings that you would,
Yeah.
or tragic ending characters,
Well, like all great iconic characters, there's a great paradox. So the idea of all great drama and the idea of generating heat, which you probably can't see, but I'll write it anyway. This is a plus and minus. Part of generating heat, if you look at a battery, there's a plus and a minus sign on it. Heat is generated by the collision of positive and negative. So tragedy, of course, goes to the negative, but there can't be the drama and the heat of tragedy, which also needs the heat, without also the positive. So there's a really great famous essay written by Arthur Miller called Tragedy and the Common Man. And basically, what I think, I just think, it's brilliant, and he's written some of the best theatrical tragedies. He says the key component to tragedy is potential, which is the great positive, right? So Death of a Salesman isn't tragic unless there's the potential that Willy Loman could have made another choice. He had so many positives in his life, and if he could have just segued out of sales or and started gardening and appreciating his family and his grandkids, it would have had a different result. So I think you need to find the positive, the potential of what I could have been a contender. You got to look for the positive, take the character to that fork in the road, and they don't, because of depression, if Arthur Miller's characters were taking Prozac, there wouldn't have been any of these great plays. So in the first 10 pages, I think a lot of it is to see the life in them and what the dreams they have, and the potential for a positive, happy life, and then start to strip that away. And there's always a lifeline. One of the things I didn't mention, because there's no time, but the agents of change, the characters in a script that do cause this evolution to have either a happy result or a tragic result, it's not, you have your protagonist, but it's not necessarily the antagonist that's going to facilitate that evolution. There's another character in the mix called the pivotal character, and the pivotal character is almost always is the agent of change. And in a tragedy, very often the pivotal character will present, what could be another option, and it's just a matter of if the character accepts it or rejects it, So hopefully that answers your question. You got to, look for the positive and the dormant potential and see if they take it or not, Anybody, final question? I think we're out of time. All right, thank you so much for coming and your attention.
You've been listening to the Skylight Books Author Reading Series. Don't forget that you can check out this and all our other great podcasts at www.skylightbooks.com. Today's music was provided by Ashley and Arlo. You can check them out at MySpace, Facebook, or at the iTunes Music Store. Thanks for stopping by, and we hope to see you soon.